two, one, two, three.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. I'm here today with Stephanie Redmond of an organization called Clean. Stephanie, what is the full name of Clean and what does the organization do?
So CLEAN stands for Cayuga Lake Environmental Action Now. We are a group of local citizens that have gotten together because we're concerned about the water quality on Cayuga Lake. And so we've been sort of an activist group focusing mostly on industrial pollution. And our main focus at this point is the Cargill Salt Mine. We've been working for over 5 years on trying to get more oversight of that mine.
What are the concerns about the Cargill Salt Mine? And maybe for people who might be new to the community, say where it is and what the concerns are and what the threat, how it threatens the lake.
Cargill, I should say, bought that mine in the 1970s, and it was primarily underneath Lansing at that point, the town of Lansing. And they were drilling down about 1,500 feet into the salt layer there. And in the 80s, they actually drilled down even further to a deeper salt level that's about 2,000 feet. And then they began going underneath the lake. They've actually expanded their mine underneath the lake, so it's now 20 square miles underneath the lake. So our biggest concerns are that there could be a catastrophic collapse like there was in 1994 at the Redmond mine, which has very similar geology, it's a little bit northwest of here. And that collapse caused a hydrogeologic connection that tainted the aquifer there, salinized the aquifer, and is still salinized to this day. So there's concern that that could happen underneath our lake and increase the salinity for the water of the lake. But there's actually also surface operations that they allow water to outfall into the lake. And there's Speedy's outfall or Speedy's permit, which allows a certain level of salinity and chloride, allows for about 40,000 milligrams per liter of chloride to come into the lake. Now, the lake is only at 40 milligrams per liter, which is already high for a freshwater lake like this. If there wasn't human development, for example, it'd be about 20 milligrams per liter. At 40,000 milligrams per liter, which their Speedy's outfall allows, that's more than twice the level of seawater coming into our lake. So having that salinity level, that chloride level coming into a freshwater aquatic system can do a lot of damage to the species that would naturally exist there.
You said something about that sounded like Speedies. I could you say that a little more
A
carefully and
Speedy's a Speedy's permit is basically a permit that's given to them by the DEC, and it allows a certain level of contamination to come off of their surface operations and then be put into the lake. So that's regulated. The DEC allows them to have that permit, and we feel like that's way too high. It should not be allowed to come into the lake that high.
we should also define DEC, Department of Environmental
Conservation.
Conservation of the state, I believe. But
Yes, New York State.
let's go over what the concerns are. There's a concern about some of what is being put into the lake now, just
Yes.
routinely from surface operations. There is also a potential concern that if the You
If
might
the mine
say,
collapsed,
yeah.
yeah, then you would have a hydrogeologic connection that could be created between the mine and the lake. So normally, when you have some sort of industrialization of an area, you would have an EIS, an environmental impact statement. So I'm also the town supervisor for the town of Enfield, and we have an EIS on almost anything that large that happens in the town. And that allows for a public hearing. So that allows for our community to come in and talk to the town board or talk to the planning board and discuss their concerns and make any changes to the proposal if needed. And so this has not happened with Cargill. They've been mining there for over 50 years now, and not one time has the public been allowed to have a public hearing and have a full environmental impact statement for this mine. Now, it's important to remember that this mine is an industrialized area that's 20 square miles. That is the size of the entire town of the town of Enfield. So if I were to allow an out of state company. So Cargill is the largest privately owned company in the United States. They're privately owned by the Cargill family. They're a family of many, many billionaires. If I were to allow a company like that to come into Enfield and literally industrialize an entire, area the size of the town of Enfield, can you imagine the uproar that you would have from the local community? They would definitely demand a public hearing. They would definitely demand a full EIS. And that has not happened. And I think a lot of that is because it's sort of out of sight, out of mind. Like people don't even know that it's down there. There's so many local residents here in Tompkins County that have no idea there's even a mine underneath the lake because their surface operations are pretty small. So they don't realize there's this huge mine underneath the lake and it's fully industrialized. If you were to swim down to the bottom of the lake and then dig down, a half a mile, you would find somebody driving around in a truck down there. And, I mean, it's an industrialized area down there. And so we are very concerned that that has never happened, that the public has never been able to be asked, do you want this here? And it should be more than one public hearing because this is a very extensive project. So people should be, brought up to speed about, what this is and what the concerns are over time. And this should have been a continuous process. And the fact that it's never been done, it's just a travesty. I mean, they should never have been allowed to mine at the lake in the first place. I think if most people knew that our water was being threatened for, billionaires out of state to get richer, they would not agree to have this mine underneath our lake. And the thing is, the salt beds that they are mining in, they extend across the entire southern half of New York State. There's no reason to be under Cayuga Lake. They could get that salt from other places. And so the fact that they're threatening this huge freshwater resource that is one of the most important resources in New York State is just, it's a huge concern that we have not, as the taxpayers and therefore the owners of this lake, have not been engaged in this process.
About the threat further, I remember in some public meeting hearing somebody say that salt in the lake would be a threat to tourism. Now, I was sort of, just quietly thought to myself, I didn't question it out loud, but thought to myself, well, is that really the problem? Because after all, on the ocean, there's lots of boating on salt water.
So I think it's important to remember that the ecology of the ocean is set up for salt water, whereas the ecology of this lake is not set up for salt water. So, for example, brown trout are very susceptible to higher levels of salinity. And if there was a catastrophic collapse and it does increase the levels of salinity in our lake, we would have a massive die off of a lot of our freshwater aquatic species. And so, our lake is a destination. It's like one of the most world-class fishing locations. People come to Cayuga Lake for fishing derbies. The largest bass was caught in New York State in Cayuga Lake last year. And so that's just one aspect of it. I mean, Teganic, for example, they host over 500,000 visitors every single year for that public access to that beach. And the thing is, they could have if there was a catastrophic collapse too, it could have effects on like the zooplankton. It could increase the levels of harmful algal blooms. And in 2001, for example, there was a Texas lake that had very high levels of harmful algal blooms all summer long. And they lost over $3 million in tourism because people would not go there and swim there. A similar thing happened in the Catskills where they were having issues with harmful algal blooms, and the entire town was impacted economically because, I was once talking to a local winery owner, and he's like, "Yes, I grow grapes. Yes, I make wine. But what I really am, I'm in tourism. That's what I do." And so you have to understand, people are coming here because the Finger Lakes are a destination. The Finger Lakes host over 60,000 jobs in tourism, and it's over a $3 billion industry. So it's absolutely imperative that we protect these lakes and understand not just how important it is for the drinking water source. I mean, it's the drinking water for over 100,000 people at Cayuga Lake, but it's also a really important part of our recreation, our community, our ecology, and our economics.
Wait, tell me a little more about. I mean, at that moment, I was thinking the problem is that people drink the water, but 100,000 is like the population of Tompkins County, but we don't all get our water from the lake. And so maybe you
That's
can give a slightly better picture of,
of the water resources.
yeah,
So
of who drinks it and who doesn't.
yes. So Bolton Point pulls out a lot of water. They're one of the main water purveyors on Cayuga Lake. And they serve areas of the towns of Lansing and Dryden and Ithaca. Ithaca also does have a couple of other water purveyors, but if Cayuga Lake were to go down, those water purveyors are in a shared service agreement. So they would also have to cover those other homes. So they would have to dip into their supply as well. But there's many homes around the lake that actually draw water directly from the lake. They have their own filtration system, and there's other water purveyors up the shores of the lake as well.
So other counties,
Yes.
people in other counties are also drinking water from
Yep.
Cayuga Lake.
Definitely.
Yeah, here I live in the city of Ithaca, and I know that our water comes from 6 Mile Creek. So my first thought was, hey, we don't have to worry about this. In fact, you might say it was one of my reasons for favoring the city spending the money to build their own water purification plant. But I guess what I'm hearing from you is that if there were a disaster to the Bolton Point water supply, then probably a lot of our water from the city would get shipped to other areas, and we would still have water, but much less than usual.
That's true. And Trumansburg, for example, also gets their water from the lake. So yeah, there's definitely a need to deal with the other areas around there that get their water from the lake, and that would come from other water purveyors in the area.
Now, there is one, I mentioned the city getting water from 6 Mile Creek. There is also Cornell University getting water from Fall Creek. Cornell tends not to share anything.
Well, they're still part of the shared service agreement, as far as I know. They would still be part of sharing their water.
So they too would have to give up on some of it. So I guess the big question is, what exactly is clean asking for?
Paramount is that we have an EIS. There's a number of studies that need to be done, limnological studies that really look into the impacts on a freshwater ecology of the lake, and then also other geological studies, and needs to incorporate public input in a public hearing. And a lot of these studies need to be independent. At this point, Cargill is hiring their own consultant to produce their annual reports, and then they give that report to the DEC. So, in my opinion, that's a significant conflict of interest. If they don't like what their consultant is saying, are they just going to fire that consultant and hire a different consultant? I mean, they've changed consultants in the past. Is that why they changed consultants? Would that make a consultant want to give them a more favorable review or give them an answer that they like? I mean, the monetary conflict of interest there is pretty stark. And so having independent geologic reviews is really important, and taking in a public hearing is really important. We also want a closure plan. There's not a really significant closure plan. It's like 2 paragraphs. Basically says plug the shafts and you're done. We want to know, do the vehicles have to come out? What about the hydraulic fluid in the vehicles, or the gas, or whatever the, chemicals they have in their equipment down there? Does that have to be removed, or is that going to be left down there? Are they going to flood the mine afterwards, or are they going to leave it dry? What's going to become of it? And so there's a lot of studies that need to be done about that. There's a lot of input that should be given by the local community as well, and a lot of, again, independent review and independent studies that need to be done about this.
Well, is the problem that who would pay for independent studies?
We do feel like it's important for Cargill to be responsible for paying for that, but we think that the DEC should be hiring the outside independent reviews. Additionally, we want an environmental bond to be put in place. So Cargill last year put their mine up for sale. They hired the Deutsche Bank, they contracted with the Deutsche Bank for the sale of the mine. As far as we know, nobody has, stepped to the plate and wanted to buy this mine. We do have concerns that there may be actual problems with the mine, maybe a higher level of influx of outflow or inflow waters that are, we don't really know where they're coming from. Perhaps some issues with the geology and the stability of the mine. We don't really know. But we do think that with them putting up the mine for sale and looking at the economic situation that's happening with salt right now, that Cargill might be looking for an out. So if they were to leave the area, they've gained all of this profit from our communal resource, and then they leave, and then they have a 3.5 million dollar decommission bond, right? And so with that, they would basically just have enough to deal with their surface operations. So there's no like plan for long-term monitoring or potential remediation. So if the mine were to collapse, say 20, 50 years from now, who would be on the hook for that? It would be us, the taxpayer, that would be on the hook for that. If there was an issue and it increased the salinity of the lake, Cargill would be gone. They would have wiped their hands from it, abandoned the mine, or sold it and be gone. And so I think it's really important that we have this environmental bond in place, and it should be to the tune of like $10 billion. It should be enough so there's definitely enough money for long-term monitoring and remediation. It's important to remember that these mining panels can take hundreds of years to close. And so during that time, the value of that water will only increase. I mean, people are coming here. There is development pressure here. People are coming here because they don't want to deal with the wildfire smoke on the West Coast, or they might be running out of water, in the Southwest, and they might be wanting to get away from those issues. They might have coastal cities that are looking like they might flood because of climate change. People will be looking for other areas to be displaced to, and they may come here. And if they come here, we're going to feel pretty sad that this water has been destroyed and that there's no money to deal with a desalinization plant or all the households along there that rely on that water. Who's going to compensate them for that? And like I said, there's the whole impact of the tourism economy and things like that. So the Cargill has profited. They should be responsible for paying for a lot of these issues.
So is this something that is normally done when a factory closes, let's say?
I don't know of a situation in which an environmental bond has been put in place. This would definitely require new legislation that would require this mine to have this environmental bond put in place. I would like to see our legislators pick that up and require that as a new bill. But an EIS is something that is regularly done. And there's another salt mine in New York State that's had 2 EISs in the last 20 years, whereas Cargill has had none in 50 years. So, we're definitely seeing some discrepancies there. And I do think that there's a pathway forward to have this environmental bond to be put in place, but it'd definitely be a new item.
Well, when you talk about legislators, are you talking about the state?
Yes. So Leah Webb is our Senate member here, and Anna Kellis is our Assembly member. And both of them have proposed bills to the legislature and asking for these environmental bonds to be put in place for a closure plan for an EIS. And so we're hoping that those will be taken up this year, and hopefully they'll be voted into place.
Okay, so there is some hope of things turning a little more secure. Sit.
Hopefully, right now, Cargill's asking for a permit renewal and a modification for their permit to be able to store brine now in their mine. Because they have all these inflows, they have nowhere to put it, so they want to store now water, brine in their mine, which is a concern because that water can erode some of the salt pillars that actually hold up the mine. So they're asking for this modification. So it gave us the opportunity to ask for public comment. And so people, I mean, it wasn't a public hearing, but it was public comment. So people and our group and many other groups put in public comment asking for this EIS and asking for an environmental bond and a number of other things. And we brought up concerns about the safety of the mine. So there is a process, and hopefully the DEC will take this into consideration. But yeah, I have some hope that we'll see some changes in the future.
Sounds a little problematic, actually, to me. Uh, I guess Cargill is so enormous as a company that they've just been able to ride roughshod over.
It does seem like that. I mean, they are notorious as an international company for numerous human rights violations and environmental violations, and that is kind of par for course for them that they will go into an area and cause a lot of disturbances and then leave. And so we're hoping that they will be held responsible for any consequences of their mine and the profits that they've gained from it.
Yeah, I mean, can you give any examples of this kind of a bond with, being created elsewhere? I mean,
I don't
elsewhere in
know
New
of
York
one.
State. Okay.
I don't know of one. I think this would have to be new legislation to create something like that.
Uh-huh.
With the Retzoff mine, the company that owned it at the time was they were held responsible for a little while to try to desalinize the water, and then when that wasn't working, they basically paid a small fine. I mean, it was in the millions, not in the billions, and walked away, and so left that aquifer. I don't want to say permanently tainted, but tainted to this day. Who knows how long it will take for that situation to rectify itself. So the Office of General Service is a New York State organization, and they actually hold the lease for this mine. So they are basically stewards of public land for New York State. And so the problem with this is they have kind of a consent order in the way that they hold their lease. So it just automatically renews every 10 years without ever any sort of significant overview or review of the mine. And as stewards of public lands, they should have much more impact with this lease than they are. They should require certain things to be met, conditions to be met, so that it's a little bit more so that it looks at least appears to have more oversight than it does, where they're just sort of acting like it's an administrative sort of issue. And so we are considering developing a petition to OGS to review their consent order and to basically take it more seriously and their role as stewards of public land and actually require more oversight, require more review of this lease and of the mine, and to work more directly with the DEC to make sure those are happening.
I think you have talked about three salt mines in New York State. One is Retzoff,
Yeah,
uh, out, I think, a little southwest of Rochester, I heard.
yeah, exactly.
And that's the one that, with geology similar to the geology here, that mine collapsed,
Yes.
causing pretty mass. Now, was that a mine as big as this one?
No, it was not as big as this one is, and it also was not under a lake. So it did have an aquifer above it, but it was not as it didn't have like huge freshwater resource like our lake. It was basically in a cornfield. Um, it was kind of a good place for something like that to happen in a sense that, it didn't impact a lot of people's water supplies. There definitely was some drawdown and some impact of the local wells, but there wasn't a huge housing population around it. So it would have definitely more of a significant impact in this area with the larger freshwater supply and more people relying on that water.
And you also talked about a third salt mine somewhere in New York State.
Yeah, Hampton Corners. It's American rock salt. They are another salt mine in New York State.
Where is that?
It's
Uh,
a bit smaller than this mine, and the workers are unionized, which our workers are not here at this
mm.
mine. So, and they also have a lot more oversight. It seems like that than they do here, and they're not underneath the lake. So, I'd say if you're going to buy your salt, get it from them.
So it sounds like we're in an unusually dangerous situation here.
We
Uh,
are. Yeah. And the other thing that I've been concerned about, I actually grew up in Lansing where this mine is located. And a lot of local people work there. I mean, they employ about 200 people there. And like I said, they are not unionized. And so when Cargill eventually closes, I'm concerned that they don't have anyone advocating for them. Will they get a significant severance package? Cargill's not known for really caring for their workers. So I worry that they won't get a good severance package. I do think that that long-term medical care, for example, should be advocated for those workers. I think it's important to recognize that Cargill has not just benefited from our communal water resources, they've also benefited from our work population. And they've made profits from these, and they should be held responsible and care for those after the fact. There actually used to be a solution mine too, north of Lansing, in what is now called Salt Point. So I think it was in it must have been in the early 1900s that they had a small solution mine there before the operations moved to the southern part of Lansing.
I had always assumed that when I heard Salt Point, that was where the mine was, but it isn't, apparently.
No, it's actually down at Portland Point, but then they have gone north. So it goes. I mean, it's extensive. So it goes underneath, of course, significant parts of the town of Lansing. It also goes underneath parts of the West Shore around the Nature Center, and then it travels north and south about 10 miles or more. And so they actually just put in a new shaft in North Lansing, even further north than Salt Point. And so they originally put that in because they wanted to have sort of an air intake, electrical intake, but now they've opened it up because they are so far away from their southern entry point, their surface operations there, that if there was a problem with the mine, they wanted an extra egress, or they were required basically to have an extra egress for their workers.
Wow. So this is really a huge danger. Thank you, Stephanie Redmond, for telling us about all the problems surrounding the Cargill Salt Mine in Lansing and under the lake. This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. Thanks for watching.